Welcome to your fairy tale wedding show. I am your host, Claudia Chen. Your wedding can't go without food. And you know the saying, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Well, it also applies to your guests. So here with us today is our catering expert, Matt Dunbar from No Small Feast, who share with us tips on choosing the perfect caterer for your big day. Hi, Matt. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Good to be here.
Very good to have you on here. So excited to chat with you. So would you be able to tell our viewers a little bit about who you are and how you got into being a chef?
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm Matt Dunbar. Um, I grew up always excited and obsessed with food, starting as early as I can remember making pancakes, baking bread with my grandmother. And then all through my life, I was always the kid that was making dinner for the family, kind of always in the kitchen. I ended up going to university for about a year, and then I decided to chase my dream. So I left and I joined the George Brown Hospitality Management course. Following that, bounced around to a few different restaurants, and eventually I ended up at North 44, where I met my business partner, Mike Abbott. The two of us worked together for about 4 years, and towards the end, his cousin's friend had a birthday party. He was looking for someone to do the food for, so we covered that. And at the end of the day, we kind of looked at each other and thought, boy, that was a lot more fun, and we made a lot more money, and it was just a much more rewarding experience. So we decided that was the start of our careers, and we kind of began our own journey into catering. So that led to doing a whole bunch of small parties from my mom's kitchen in Richmond Hill. Eventually, we got our own small commercial kitchen, and we kind of leapfrogged from one to the next, getting a little bit bigger and bigger until we finally had enough clientele, enough money saved up, and we built our own big, beautiful commercial kitchen about 3 years ago and moved in there, and we've been happy ever since.
Wow, that's an incredible journey. Now, for No Small Fees, could you tell our viewers a little bit more about what kind of services your company offers?
Yeah, so we offer all services, whether you're having a dinner for two in your house for celebrating an anniversary, or you're throwing a gigantic gala for 3,000 people is the biggest party we've ever done. Um, but we do everything in between: corporate lunches, weddings, any kind of a celebration. Where we really like to shine is when people give us the opportunity to be creative. Of course, we have our set menus, but for example, if a bride and groom walks in and they say they love Caribbean food and they met down in the islands or something, we'll come up with an awesome menu themed after that. It really just, we strive to make everything personalized, regardless of the fact that we're growing into a larger company and we can do bigger things. We still like to have that boutique feel. So if you decide to call us up, you'll wind up in our tasting room face to face with me, and we kind of develop a personal relationship. That's what leads to a really memorable event.
And it's always great to actually create something specifically for a couple.
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, we can get bored cooking the same thing over and over. So it keeps the team excited to be making something new and really stretching our legs.
Yeah, for sure. So for wedding couples who are looking for a catering service, at what point should they start looking?
I would bet you everyone's going to give you the same answer, but I would say as early as possible. Um, we can have a lot of insight into different parts of your wedding that may not be directly food related. So if you're looking for a venue and you've already got a caterer selected, we can go with you. We can make the initial phone calls. We can work our connections to maybe get you a better deal or a more favorable date, or just some perks that you may not be able to get just walking off the street talking to a venue. And outside of that, if you've already decided on a style for your wedding and specific foods, I can walk into a venue and say, you know what, this one would work perfectly for your dream, whereas this one may have some roadblocks that we won't be able to accomplish what you're looking for. So um, it'd be great if you can get us as early as possible. If you've already selected a venue, you should be looking for a caterer somewhere at least 9 months out just to secure the date. And after that, there's not too much that you need to do outside of about 8 weeks prior.
Okay. Now, since you were talking about the timeline, so why is it only 8 weeks out that you won't be kind of starting to do something about that?
Okay, so let's back it up and go through essentially the entire timeline. Hypothetically, if you've called us about a year before your wedding, the first step would be have the caterer prepare a brief quote and proposal. That gives you an idea whether or not that caterer is going to be within your price range.
Mhm.
If everything seems to be appropriate from there, then you would want to book a tasting. Some caterers will charge you for his tasting, some will do it for free. If you're a little bit flexible, that's the way we work. the idea is you want to come in, taste some of the food we're making, not necessarily the exact menu that you're going to have, but you want to know that all of the things we're making are made with love and care, and you're going to like the style of food that we do. So after that tasting, that's when we would have a discussion, customize everything, and put together a really comprehensive, personalized quote. Um, that whole process can take about a month, usually just because you want to have the right timing down for, you know, making sure we've got the right parties and we can kind of pinch things off and have the right food for your tasting. Following that proposal, once you sign off and you say, Matt, we want to go with you and this is heading in the right direction, that's when things can kind of get pushed to the back burner. There's really no rush. It kind of depends on the couple. I have people who walk in, do the tasting, sign the form. 2 weeks later, we're at the rental company picking china patterns, and then we're done. I don't need to talk to you. Other people like to draw it out a little bit, maybe wait for new menus we've created. If we're happy to be coming up with some exciting things closer to your wedding, I'll always be offering to make changes if you'd like. But really, between booking and getting your basic rentals taken care of, there's not much to do. And then about 8 weeks before, that's when we start the conversation again. We find out a general idea of where your numbers are after your RSVPs, if you've got any weird and wacky dietary restrictions to worry about. Um, and then it just becomes really the bride and groom end up talking to me about other problems they may be having that we may be able to solve. If they've got DJ problems or decor things, because we have sort of that inside information, we can usually do a little bit of counseling. And then 2 weeks before that, that's when we usually lock in the numbers and we say, that's the amount of people that are going to be at the wedding. That's the amount of food we're going to be cooking.
So, Matt, since we're talking about the food process and coming up with ideas, what kind of food style do you actually offer?
Well, so there's basically four-ish main styles that we find ourselves doing. There's the traditional where you would have a cocktail hour with hors d'oeuvres followed by a 3-4 course meal. And then there's buffet. There's what we call tapas, which is also leads into station. So that's why I said four-ish. Um, that's where you'd have not quite a single line buffet where people have a single plate and walk through and pick their starches and their main course, proteins or vegetables. Stations are a little more fun. They're a little more composed meals at each different spot in the room. And then we've actually had a lot of people doing simply just cocktail parties or hors d'oeuvres.
Mm-hmm.
And we would sometimes have, if it's a smaller wedding, rather than doing stations, we would call it tapas, and that's where we would have similar menus that would be from the stations, but we would just have those items passed directly to the guests.
I see.
There's also family style, sorry to interrupt, which comes with a whole bunch of issues that people don't typically think about, and I'd love to address that now. People often think family style is going to be the most economical and easiest, whereas two things they don't necessarily think of is we need to bring a lot more food because we don't necessarily know how many people or how many portions each person will take from the table when comparing that to us doing a plated version.
Mm.
And the second thing that people never consider with family style is you need a lot of room on the table to put platters down. And those platters are not cheap. So family style, where on paper it may seem like a great option, usually is the most expensive way to go.
Oh, I see. Oh, so you're talking about family style, as in you put the food in the middle of the table and whichever guest
Yeah,
wants to. Okay, I see.
exactly.
And talking about plated food, what about the servicing staff? Is it usually come with the venue, or do you have your own servicing staff, and how does that work?
So we work with our own staffing agency. So anytime a venue does allow outside vendors in, we will use ours because they know our style. We've got the same team that works with us all the time, and we're very comfortable. A lot of venues have preferred vendors, much like you have to use the caterer on site. You'll also have to use the staffing agency on site. One way or the other, the caterers are usually pretty good about working with any staffing agency.
I see, I see. Now, for people who are actually looking for a catering service, would you be able to share with our couples maybe a few questions that they should ask the caterer to make sure it is a service that is perfect for them?
Okay, so a handful of questions that you should definitely be asking, and these kind of go hand in hand with venues. I think that you really want to have a lot of discussions with the venue and the caterer at the same time because the questions pertain to both. First off, you want to make sure that you've asked a venue about a landmark fee. That's a additional fee. It could be on staff, it could be on staff and food, it could be on staff and food and rentals, and it could be anywhere from 5 to 25% of your total bill.
Mhm.
So you want to make sure you're aware of that, and then you make sure you make the caterer aware of any kind of landmark fee, because that could be an extra cost that's added to your final bill, and a lot of people are surprised by that.
Mhm.
You want to also have the caterer check in with the venue to make sure they've got an appropriate amount of equipment. Make sure that they've got an alcohol policy figured out, whether it's going to be you can bring your own booze or whether it's open bar or consumption. A lot of caterers, myself included, will offer alcohol services. So that's a nice thing to take the load off you. Usually it's pretty cheap, and it means you don't need to think about how much of everything to get. You don't need to schlep it in the day of. You don't need to get any returns the next day. It's off your plate for a couple $100. So definitely something to ask the caterer about. Um, you want to ask the caterer what their preferred vendors are, back to your staffing question. Find out a little bit about their relationship with their staffing company, how long they've been working together, because the way the front of house works and the back of house works is if they're not completely in sync, you're not going to have a smooth wedding. Talk to your caterer about all the different services that they do offer. Some caterers are literally just drop off the food. Other caterers are basically full service, right up to rudimentary event planning. So for example, we'll take care of staffing, we can arrange your DJ, we can do florals for you, we can handle getting you a limo service or valet.
Ah,
Basically, because of the industry we work in, if we don't have the services in-house, we've been around long enough and we have connections that we can point you in the right direction, and we're usually totally willing to just throw it all under one package to make your life simple. Um, Absolutely ask for a tasting as early as possible. In my opinion, a tasting shouldn't cost you anything as long as you're flexible about two things: time and exactly what you're eating. If you want to walk in and say, you know what, Mr. Caterer, I need to try menu A, B, and C, then he's going to have to go out of his way to prepare that food specifically for your tasting. That's going to cost him a lot of time and money in both food cost and labor cost. But if you're willing to walk in and say, you know what, if you're already cooking for 150 people on Friday, I'll come in on Saturday and have a taste of everything they had. That shouldn't cost the guy anything, and that shouldn't cost you anything. As long as you're serious, obviously, don't go around asking for free meals from 15 different caterers. And the last one is not so much a question, but just make sure you're as open and honest with the caterer as possible. If food isn't super important to you, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's the case, be honest, because if somebody tells me that, then I'm going to search for ways to make it the most efficient, cost effective. Let's get everyone fed and happy, but we don't need the flourishes. Whereas if a couple walks in and says they're huge foodies and tells me their favorite restaurants and what they like to cook for each other at home, then we're going to take a little bit of extra care and really dive deep on making sure that the food is the star of the show. So just making sure that the caterer fully understands what your dream is, and don't be afraid to just really open up to them.
that's really great that the questions that you have offered the couples for them to ask caterers. And I just want to go backtrack a little bit to talk a little bit more about the tasting menu. Now, I know that for example, some couples, for example, you was suggesting that if a couple wants to have Caribbean food, and how does that tasting menu will work? Because you're just tasting something that the caterer has offered to you, but it may not be something that you have in mind. And I don't know if you will be able to address that a little bit.
Well, like I said, we're totally willing. Let's say, take the Caribbean example. If you want to come in and you want to be assured that I'm going to make an awesome Caribbean menu, and there just doesn't happen to be anything that I'm making anything remotely like that in the timeline that we want to get you in, then we can do it. You'll probably just have to pay the food cost and the labor cost. So it's not like I'm making a profit on you coming in, but I will have to cover costs. Whereas just coming in and tasting, you're not coming in and trying one quick little bite. I don't know how other caterers work, but I know that a tasting in our venue or in our tasting room, it takes about 2 hours, and usually it's quite the feast. We'll bring you in, we'll show you about 8 to 10 of our different hors d'oeuvres, and then we'll usually put you through maybe a 4 or even a 5 course meal. Because the fact is, if you're there on a Friday, we usually have 3 or 4 different parties going every weekend, which means there's a vast menu of things that I can choose from. So it comes down to, you know what, if 15 different things that you try are fantastic, then you can rest assured that anything else I'm going to make is going to be on the same caliber. And the opposite is true. If you go into a tasting and something they give you is just kind of meh, well, then that should scare you away, because the fact is, if they can't cook the best meal that you've had for just two of you, how are they going to do it for 200?
Okay, that really answers the question. And I think it's actually very good for you to point out the fact that you should let your caterer know whether you are really big on the food or not. And for you to be able to offer something that is very good, but it doesn't have to be exceptional, really brings down that efficiency cost into the equation. And it's actually a very good point that you've made, and it's good to know.
It's just so important to make sure that you're both on the same page as far as what expectations are. Um, like everything in this world, higher expectations usually come with a higher price tag, but you don't want to try and trick your caterer, and then at the end of the day, you're just going to be disappointed. Honesty just works out for everybody. And I mean, I don't know how other people work, but I like to be upfront, and I'm not in the business of selling people things they don't need, nor am I in the business of underselling them when I think that they're actually desiring something very high end.
That's really good to know. Thank you so much. Now, our interview is almost coming to a close, and I know that you have a small free gift for our viewers. Would you be able to share a little bit more about it?
Yeah. So we're going to put together a comprehensive list, basically your roadmap for walking into or picking up the phone and speaking to any catering company, just the top things that you want to make sure you've checked off, because there can be a lot of surprises. There can be a lot of things that, depending on the caterer, they may not think to ask you, but I want to make sure that you are asking them, because the more knowledge you have, the less stressful this entire process can be. And the fact is, getting married can be probably one of the most stressful things you do, but it doesn't have to be if you've got the right people guiding you.
And that's very generous of you. And because for the people like the general public who are not in the wedding industry, we just don't know what we don't know. And it's always good to actually have something that to fall back on, so that we can actually ask the right question, right?
Yeah.
And
Well, this is the funny thing about weddings is the vast majority of people are getting married for the first time. So,
yeah, for sure. And I mean, if they don't have anyone in front of them, like a sibling in front of them, they probably wouldn't have known anything at all. It's just everything is on either TV or magazine or whatnot, right? And it's always just in front of them. All the back end stuff they probably don't know. And it's very generous of you. Thank you so much for your time, Matt, for spending time with us today and sharing so much of your knowledge with us.
my pleasure.
All right, bye.
Bye bye.